Welcome to the Calibre Cast, a podcast dedicated to facilitating high caliber conversations in architecture, engineering, and construction. Join Calibre Engineering as we delve into insightful discussions with industry experts exploring the latest trends, innovations, and challenges shaping the AEC world. We're kicking off our second episode with an enlightening panel discussion on breaking barriers and leading change for people within the LGBTQ plus community. Join these remarkable leaders as they discuss hot topic issues for people within this community. Today, our panel consists of Jennifer Winters and Mary Powell with the Mile High Flood District, Neil Stewart with Stantec, and Rick Zaney with Mortensen. Stephanie Kalk with Calibre Engineering and Matthew Kroll with JVA will serve as moderators for this episode. We are also joined by Calibre's strategic communications team, Emily Valines, Wendy Smith, Maya Thompson, and me, your host, Andre Brooks. I feel like a great place to start off today is just in starting and saying maybe your name, what industry you work for, and then also just kind of how you found yourself within your position.
I'm Jennifer Winters. I work for the Mile High Flood District. I'm one of the managers there. 22 years of stormwater floodplain experience and kind of worked my way up through various consulting companies to get to this position on the public side.
My name is Neil Stewart. I'm a senior water resource engineer with Stantec. I work in the engineering consulting space. Been there for about 11 years. Most of my work is in water supply planning and integrated water resources management.
I'm Mary Powell with the Mile High Flood District. I'm the environmental manager there, so I do not have an engineering background, but work with a ton of them. So, but I've been in the industry for probably more than 30 years. A lot of that as a consultant, working with engineers on projects, getting permits and so forth. And now I'm actually at the Mile High Flood District, working in the public sector.
I'm Rick Zaney. I'm an assistant project manager with Mortensen, been in the construction industry for about 6 years now, straight out of college, all within Mortensen, all in construction. Went to school with Steel Boulder, degree in civil engineering, and just found myself kind of falling in love with vertical construction buildings.
I'm Stephanie Kalk. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a civil engineer at Calibre Engineering, mostly focusing on water resources. And I'm pretty new to the field. I've been here for about 2 years.
I'm Matthew Kroll. I'm the marketing director for J. We're a civil, structural, and water and wastewater engineering firm. And I've been in the industry for about just over 20 years. And I've been at JVA for 10 years. My pronouns are he, him.
Like I mentioned earlier, just so excited and happy to facilitate and have this discussion, as well as the partnership with JVA to have this discussion and be in this space. And so it is that. It's a discussion, feel open, and just share your thoughts all around. And so for this first one, a great place to start is, what initiatives or changes do you believe are necessary to further support the leadership progression of plus members in the AEC industry?
Place to start is recognize that the traditional metrics and ways that we promote people into leadership roles are focusing on characteristics and traits that are maybe for white men, straight men. And then if we want to expand the folks who go into leadership spaces and for LGBTQ people, we need to start thinking about other ways to assess leaders and assess promotions and all of that. And it's not just for LGBTQ people, this also is applicable for non-white people and women, and really changing the way that we think about how do we select and promote leaders within the company. That's really one. And I think as well as, establishing more training education materials for LGBTQ spaces that recognize the differences within the space, and that there's not just one, there are things that are applicable to everyone, but, me as a white gay man, my experience, the things that folks may need to know about when interacting with me, and some of the things, my perspectives are vastly different from a lesbian or a trans person or a person of color, and that intersectionality between being LGBT and as well as other aspects, and developing more customized training resources that then you can deploy with not just everyone on your company, but also really focused, targeted, intensive trainings for leaders, those making decisions, those making hiring decisions, making sure that they are even more knowledgeable about how to discern between these nuances in the space.
You mentioned that the hiring standards kind of tend to favor straight white men, and that we need to rethink hiring standards, interview processes, all of that. Is there anything like specifically that you're thinking of that would be like a good example of that?
Yeah, I would say, there's a lot of KPI centric standards, like how much money did you bring and how many people do you manage? When it really should be also thinking about how effective are you? You can bring in $3 million, but if you lose it, well, that's not very good. Or if you bring in $3 million, then half your team quit halfway through the project, that probably means you're not a very effective leader. So thinking about some of those soft skills or other skills that are not just numbers based can be an effective way to think about how people are actually effective at leaders, and then it's more broadly encompassing to different skill sets.
I will expand on that a little bit too and just say, taking out, for example, language in job descriptions that can exclude certain people. So requiring certain levels of education or certain types of schools can be exclusive. So making sure you take out that language. And then another interesting thing is certain groups, when they look at a job description, they will think, I can do 60% of this, I'm gonna apply. But to other groups that see that job description, they think, I only meet 60% of this, I can't apply. So taking out anything from a job description that's not actually essential, so that it opens it up to the type of person who might see those qualifications and think, oh, I can do this, I'm qualified to do it.
That's actually something we've done in our firm, going more towards a skills-based hiring process. So exactly what you said, taking out that language and not requiring specific skills that could be taught. If they're the right fit, if they're the right kind of person, and I think it can be a better hire in the long run. They end up staying longer and fitting in the culture and really progressing in firm in a different way than just those numbers.
I think to build a little bit on what Neil said as far as supporting the leadership progression, I think being able to remove some of the policy barriers that we sometimes run into with regard to, for example, being able to take time off, even though you're not necessarily the birth parent, that you could take off if your partner has a child. And so, because that could be a ding if, oh, you're, taking time off, if we're using those old KPIs as far as, gosh, you're actually using all your vacation or whatever. And some folks just need to have that flexibility. So again, just getting institutionally looking at the job descriptions, but then also looking at those other policies, and are there any that really affect people differently that could be made more equitable?
I want to ask about HR policies, actually, because I've been thinking a lot about, for, I guess, larger firms that have offices in multiple states. And some states are easier to live in as an LGBTQ person than others. And how firms might be able to support employees who are LGBTQ who are living in a state or are being asked to live in a state that the laws would make their lives difficult. So if a firm is saying like, hey, could you move to insert state here? I don't know. I don't want to offend anyone, but it's, I don't know. I feel like it could be difficult to have conversations. I actually can't move to that state because I would not be able to get healthcare or whatever it is. And how to address that in HR policy.
That's a really good question. It's a hard one. I would hope that the leadership team would be sensitive enough to have the conversation, or that the employee who's being asked to relocate would feel comfortable having that conversation. So I think it starts with the culture of the firm being open and inclusive and recognizing, maybe that's just not a good thing to ask. And it's okay if that person declines. Yeah, it's a good question, because there are absolutely some places that I would not want to live with my family.
But you're right, the culture of the company is one that they're gonna really try and force you to move to a place that you don't feel comfortable or safe in, then you probably don't want to work for that company, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I hate to say it that way, but
Yeah.
it's kind of true.
Yeah.
Yeah, you gotta be receptive to the person and individual, right? Whatever circumstance that might be, like, you have to be open to receiving no's and potentially finding someone else. But I think policies in HR, I think like what's most important is that it's equitable throughout, no matter where you are, right? So the policy should still apply if you're living in small town USA or if you're living in New York City. It's a really hard question to maybe tailor policy specific to location-based assignments that would be like, I would say that would be like the step further into the policy making strategy. But it's just making sure that the policies that are currently in place in your company could be, again, right, like you can live by it no matter where you are working for your company itself.
Again, I guess, I think the only, I work at Stantec, which is a large, not just US company, but global company, and they have offices in UAE and places in the Middle East. I'm just kind of thinking through how I imagine what our policies are. I can't know how it works. What I hope Stantec does is they have a broad culture of inclusivity with LGBTQ individuals. They promote our LGBTQ articles. They have, the CEO write stuff during Pride Month. So it's clear from a corporate perspective that this is the type of company you work for. But for those individuals that may live in more discriminatory locations and states, that they may go the extra mile. If you live in a state where maybe it's more difficult to access inclusive healthcare for a trans individual, that the company will have a policy that covers travel to another state to receive that type of healthcare or procedure or whatever.
Seems like a lot of it starts with the leadership group and how willing they are to have that type of conversation. So if you take specific benefits like the Colorado Family Act, that applies to employees that are in the state of Colorado, who are experiencing a situation where they need to take them. What do you do if you have employees who are not in the state of Colorado? So having a leadership group that says, okay, what do we do for this person who just moved over here, or this person who lives here? And writing a policy that, okay, maybe they can't include them in the Colorado Family Act, but maybe we can write a benefit that gives them additional leave or some kind of other leave that will still apply to them outside of that Colorado Family Act. But it really has to be a leadership conversation, because you can't change the state laws or the federal laws, but you can do what you can to provide what you need to for the people that you have.
I think it's also really important too that individual that's being tasked with potentially moving to a more conservative state or somewhere that they're, again, can be themselves, right? I think it's really important for that individual in itself to voice their concerns, to really start the conversation upstream. Because my assumption is, and unfortunately, I believe it's a little bit of the reality, that's not something that's gonna just like naturally come up in a leadership conversation. You're gonna have to be brave enough to have those discussions to promote change. A little bit on like the personal side, but within the same conversation. Within my company, there's a lot of travel opportunities, and I'd be really vocal about like, hey, I would love to travel if it meets these certain requirements. And I had to have a really candid conversation with one of our directors that really is in charge of like these potential relocations, of being like, wait, why don't you want to go live in a small town, wherever? So I had to explain, well, like in my position, like there's like I'm not sure I'm gonna be super comfortable. Like I'm not probably gonna have like a life outside of work. I'm not sure I'm gonna be comfortable like just like again going to potential like hometown bars or whatever. So really like got him thinking, is like, oh, I get it now. So all right, we'll think about like if something else comes up, maybe that's when we'll reach out to you again. It was like, sounds great, thanks.
And I think it's also like, that's great that you were able to have that conversation and felt comfortable and safe to have that conversation with your manager, superior, whoever it was. It's really difficult sometimes to have to advocate for yourself in that way in an office environment, especially if you're not out, but even if you are out, because I feel like I never want to be like causing an inconvenience, causing drama, like, oh, there goes Stephanie with her absurd requirements for travel or whatever, And so it's really important, to feel comfortable with whoever you're addressing that with, because it's difficult to just be like a single individual bringing those concerns to somebody who has more power than you.
Oh, that's a really good point. And I think exactly to that point, if leadership or whoever's kind of coming up with the opportunities can, again, figure out a way to maybe provide several choices so that the person doesn't have to necessarily explain why they're choosing one or another, but just being able to come up with some alternatives of various types that might appeal to different people for different reasons, maybe something the institution itself could try to do. Because you're right. I mean, you don't want to be the nail that sticks up.
Right. I want to clarify, I'm not saying that like that is what it is. It's
No,
not
no.
unreasonable to ask for accommodations.
No,
but, like
I totally get your point, because especially if I was early on in my career, I mean, I'm not gonna ask for anything, you're just got your head down doing the work, and the last thing you want is to bring a spot, at least to me, The last thing I would want is a spotlight on me, because I'm not comfortable in that kind of setting. And yeah, so the self-abdication would be hard.
This is a really interesting conversation. What are some of the challenges or barriers that you guys have come across in your career being part of the LGBTQ plus community, and how have you overcome that?
I know for me, previous jobs, you know, younger in my career, going out to lunch with coworkers, people talking about people in a way that was making me feel uncomfortable, and me not being, I guess, comfortable enough with myself or out enough with myself to stand up for myself in that situation. A weird example, I remember I answered the phone one time at a firm I worked with, just a normal phone call. And the person asked, "Oh, did they make you shave your legs too?" Because I was a male who answered the phone, which was, you know, that's just one more barrier for me to step out and be myself. That was a long time ago. But definitely, you know, those things do happen. And I think they do push people back, you know, into the closet, unfortunately.
How did you overcome that?
For that specific example, I actually did talk to my boss. This person who had called was a photographer that we had used on job sites, and we never worked with them again. So that actually made me feel great in that moment.
The support, which goes to say, like, how far good leadership is.
Yeah. I do think it comes down to leadership. And like I said, this was a previous firm. So my current firm, you don't always know what people's background are. And even if they are not part of the LGBTQ community themselves, I know one of our current leaders has a child who is. And so they're very supportive of that and helped bring that culture to our firm and helped really start with our ERGs and getting those resources set up for the staff and staff's family members. I mean, you know, when you, especially large firms, I mean, these people could be friends, family, child, you know, children. It's not just specifically the employees sometimes. So opening it up to that and having that culture, I think really helps.
And you mentioned getting, like, it seems like some of those interactions kind of push people back into like a closeted kind of space. And I think that for me, it was true with previous like clients on when I was on the private side and you're working with clients maybe in rural areas or more conservative areas and just not wanting to even broach the subject because you felt like, you know, you didn't know what their opinion was and you didn't want it to impact the project, which was going really well, or your relationship. So you just would like not talk about your spouse or your family, which kind of left you at a very kind of superstitial level for relationship.
Well, and I think that's a great point. You know, part of this business is relationship building.
Mhm.
And so when you can't build a true relationship with a client or a sub-consultant or a vendor, it doesn't matter, you know, you really can't get to that point, you know, because you are not being yourself.
I've heard you guys talk about how becoming yourself felt so freeing. And so what advice would you give your younger self to sort of help you overcome these challenges? What's the thing that you would tell yourself if you could go back in time?
I think the first thing that I'll tell myself is that you are not alone. Like you're not, there are people like you within your organization, within your industry. You're gonna find peers that is gonna make you feel supported. There are allies right next to you. And that's just really what I wish I knew earlier. I was never, quote, out at work. I always felt similar to my peers that were just, again, felt reserved, felt like I couldn't really share about my personal lives. And it, in result, created superficial relationships where it was all just like, how was your weekend? Great, thanks. Well, how was yours? So I would just tell myself that one, there are people like you and people are more supportive than you think.
Yeah, I would tell myself that it's gonna be a lot better than you think it is. That, you know, when it's always feels like a risk when you come out to someone because you really don't know. And so you tend to put the worst spin on it in your head that it's gonna go poorly. But I would tell myself, you know what, you never had anyone run away screaming. And so it's gonna be fine. It's not as bad as you think it is. People are so accepting, really.
Yeah, I think we also have to acknowledge how much change has happened in the last decade, 15 years. So I would say things are gonna change a lot in the next 15 years. I mean, we would never have had this, when I first started my career.
Yeah.
We would have never had any kind of group that talked about this. So things are changing and still have work to do, but I had the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, I feel supported so much at my firm that say somebody, did get hired that was not, I don't know, saying the right things or was anti-LGBTQ or anti-whatever. I feel confident enough that they would be out the door in a second. So just coming back to that leadership culture that is not going to stand for anything that is not, in our culture.
I do also want to acknowledge that coming out in the workplace and coming out to friends and family at home are two different things. And usually at the workplace, there are certain protections that you have coming out to coworkers and your boss that you don't have coming out to friends and family, and that could prevent people from wanting to come out in the workplace because the more people who know, the easier it is for the information to get out to people. So I also want to just acknowledge that nobody is ever obligated to come out to anyone ever. And there are situations where you simply can't, which is unfortunate, but also that's not a moral failing to not come out. Yeah.
So one thing that I've heard you guys talk a little bit about in this conversation is this idea of getting to know yourself, this idea of sort of my ability to speak my mind has changed over time. What are some ways that you would recommend for people to get to know more about themselves or to be able to say the things that are on their mind?
I guess get involved with organizations or
Yeah.
find a mentor that can, provide a sounding board or an example that you can pick up on. But getting involved with professional organizations, especially if they have a chapter or something that's focused on community, is a good way to start. Just trying to flex your courage a little bit.
Yeah, you gotta dip your toes in the water a little bit, right? It's like you're gonna go swim somewhere and it's really cold. You never, sometimes it's a little easier to go step by step, and you got to, if you feel like you're in a position where you want to have your voice heard, right? And everyone wants to have their voice heard. You've got to just try little by little and stick with what works. And I echo that as well. I'm usually the person that's do what I say, don't do what I do. I'm technically not even a part of my Building with Pride being my company for no reason at all, just based on involvement and level of commitment currently. But with that being said, right, there are other ways that you can be involved and you can be a sounding voice and you can be seen and heard. And this is a great forum to do that.
There's ways you can do a primary objective is an LGBTQ specific space, and then that could be a secondary outcome. So primary objective is, Mary was mentioning with a mentor or someone, if you were trying to figure out how to navigate being queer within a company, and there is someone else in your company who's in a leadership position, you could ask them to be a mentor specifically within those conversations, as well as other things too. But, you could have them help you frame tough conversations or talk through a tricky dynamic with a client or a sub-consultant or a colleague. They can really be that sounding board. But then also, you can do other things, non-LGBTQ centric professional organizations, where then by joining that, you also benefit. We were talking before this about Toastmasters and how that can be a really effective way for someone who's introverted and happens to be LGBT to build that skill set. And then by doing that, you maybe feel that more comfortable to speak up more about things that may be bothering you or have tough conversations, but you're not necessarily having to address that being LGBT, you're just addressing that you're an introvert.
Joining these different groups, like you said before, our industry it really is relationship based. It's kind of, these communities are smaller than you think. You're going to run into the same people over and over and over in your career. So joining different things, making those relationships, forming that trust. Once you have trust with somebody, then it's way easier to talk about anything with them. So it's just getting to know people. It just takes time and initiative. You just have to do it.
It's telling how complex, even in this circle, how we are as humans and how diverse we can be in so many ways. If you think back to maybe other senses of leadership or different experiences. How's your leadership been personally shaped?
So I could start answering that one, thinking about my personal leadership style. I like seeking collaboration. I seek feedback when we're in meetings or discussions, but at the same time, I am very decisive. I don't like waffling decisions, and I also am a very direct communicator. Those things can sometimes be in opposition. And I think a lot of that just developed from observing folks that I worked with, mentors I had, people in leadership positions, leaders of projects, whatever, in meetings, and picking different pieces of what they have, not trying to emulate one person, but trying to think about how can a trait I really appreciate or find cool with a colleague fits within my style. And thinking about how, I would participate in meetings where, there's a man in our firm, he was one of our principal engineers for many, many, many years, and he was not loud. He was very quiet. He didn't have a dominating personality at all, but he was very effective at driving a group towards a decision because he did listen and he had developed a unique leadership style that suited him. So that's kind of how I've developed mine.
Yeah, I think everybody has to find their own way. Like you said, taking kind of some bits and pieces from your mentors, trying them, and maybe they don't work, and try something else. So I think it's everyone has to do what works for them. If trying something that doesn't work for you, it's never gonna work. And for me, it's more that one-on-one relationship based. Like I feel like I'm kind of a good people person and able to read people, and I build my way from one-on-one relationships and build that as the foundation of it.
To think, that we're, at least in my firm, we have multiple disciplines and different departments and everything, but we're all kind of on the same team and we're all in it for one goal. And that could be to make, a successful project. It could be to win that proposal, whatever it is. You want to listen and learn from others, learn from your leadership, and really just kind of be that team to get to the end goal.
Yeah, a little bit personally for me, I'm very new to being in a leadership role with a couple of direct reports, and what I'm learning every day, and I almost guarantee that I will learn to be a leader for the rest of my career, is that maybe your leadership style doesn't work the same with depending on the people you're talking to. There's a really interesting study or self-assessment that you can do called insight discovery that really kind of helps guide your conscious and unconscious leadership styles, which I highly recommend if anyone has the opportunity to take, because it really helps you understand yourself and how to handle other people. But yeah, it's like I've been learning more and more, and every day that I have to constantly adjust my leadership style depending on who exactly I'm talking to. And sometimes it's managing up, right? That's even harder, and that's a totally different piece that I'm yet to learn, and it's been tough and it's challenging, but you gotta mold yourself to specific situations.
One question I wanted to make sure we talk about today is allyship. And for the people who listen to this podcast, what does it mean to be a good ally in this industry, and how can a firm or a person be a good ally?
Yeah, so I'll take this one. One really effective way for a person to be an ally within a professional environment is recognize when you have member of the LGBT community who needs your help, and not speaking up for them or speaking on their behalf, but maybe taking some of the load off of them to always be that person. So, whether it's you work at a small company and you hired a new person who is trans, and that's the first trans person that maybe many of your colleagues are going to ever know. And instead of having that trans person who is probably navigating a bunch of other dynamics, also have to be the answer a billion questions about all of that, you can help with their permission, of course, and talking with them, kind of have some of those conversations, or kind of help coach people in some of the aspects of having a trans employee using pronouns and those types of things. Additionally, if you're in a situation where maybe you observed inappropriate behavior that maybe was witnessed by someone who's part of the LGBT community, having conversations with colleagues who are straight and maybe have those tough conversations to say, hey, that wasn't acceptable, or that, because it helps make them aware of their behavior and how it was unacceptable, but then it takes the burden off of the LGBT person to always be bringing that up and kind of feeling like they're constantly having to correct people or tell people how not to behave, and that can make it a lot easier on them. So I think those are two specific ones in a professional environment. But like I said, you have to make sure you're getting permission to do that. You're not just speaking up on someone's behalf. Maybe they are comfortable having this conversation. So just good communication and that sort of thing.
I think that's great, specifically, you gotta navigate with caution too. You don't wanna be in a position too where you as an ally could be potentially outing someone who isn't comfortable with maybe speaking outwardly to being in the community to a whole group, or maybe to you in particular. And I've had that happen to me actually, like when I was actually first starting with a Mortensen, I had an individual that I had like, oh yeah, I mean, I'm gay. And it was almost in every meeting setting with a lot of people. He wanted to just be super friendly and shout across the room, "How's your boyfriend, Rick?" And it was like, "Great, thank you so much for asking." And it was all good intention, but in result, it made me super awkward. And to the point that I had to ask him, like, "Hey, by the way, like, you don't do that to anyone else, like just to me." So I appreciate the feedback and I appreciate you like caring, etc. But tone it down a notch. So I do ask that just be cautious with each individual, right? And understand like what I would say is be visible, be present, be a resource, and at times let them come to you as well versus just that direct from you to them.
Yeah, I think that Neil and Rick are hitting on something very important, which is like just respect what the person who you're trying to support is saying and what they want. As far as like, hey, here's what I want you to call me. Here's the pronouns that I want you to use. Here's information that I do want you to like speak openly about. And here's stuff that I don't want you to speak openly about. And not like second guess or question any of those things, accepting that like the person who you're talking to, they're the expert on them and who they are. Yeah, so I think that's a very important thing that the two of you have both brought up.
I think that is all wonderful. The last thing I will also ask is for anybody listening, which we are hoping that we are worldwide with people listening right now. What actionable items, if you have any, could you give to organizations and people who are listening in terms of LGBTQ plus initiatives or policies?
I think just sharing resources throughout, the industry. I mean, something we've done is mixers with different employee resource groups. I'd love to set one up with all of you as well. And just knowing that there are resources out there, there's organizations out there that can help a firm get started, no matter what size you are.
I think just creating an open and welcoming environment, especially for small firms that maybe don't have the resources that are directly available, or, they may or may not even know if someone in the community is working for them, but that they just be ready, whatever, and not have it be, just try to avoid the awkwardness of that. I think it's just for small firms, even that little start, in addition to the policy stuff we talked about earlier, where if it's possible for a small firm to do something, then they should do it, whether they have someone from the community working there or not. It should just be standard procedure.
I think very much aligns with everything that's been said today is that it's really important that it starts top down. There needs to be policies in place that are equitable. There needs to be, from the very top, there needs to be a sense of belonging. And then that's gonna trickle down. Someone said something once that really resonated with me that I want to share is that within my company in particular, we're not in the business of changing someone's minds. But what we can do is set the standards and practices of how you will behave at work in hopes that by doing so, that potentially will change someone's perspective. They will act differently outside of work. But just again, having those practices, those policies in place from the top down is really what's gonna guide your company, really create like a belonging environment.
I think ultimately we talk about lots of helpful resources, employee resource groups and trainings and all that, but the things that are the most effective are the things that typically cost money for companies. I've kind of checked out our healthcare, it's making sure that your company provides health insurance that's inclusive for trans people. Does your coverage provide, gender affirmation and transition healthcare? Does it include mental health care? Those types of things that are particularly amplified within the LGBTQ space, and those may be more expensive plans or whatever, but those are very helpful. We talk about big policies, top-down policies, but it's also, I think the most effective resource is just hiring more LGBTQ people, making making sure that you're putting them into leadership positions throughout the company, up and down, not just in traditionally queer spaces. And because by doing that, you add visibility, you create community. And I was talking with Jen before we started this podcast about how when I started, this sounded like forever ago, but started in 2013, and in my office of about 120 people, I was the only gay person. Maybe there was a few closeted people or people who I didn't know about, but I was the one who was really super visible. Now, our firm has grown a bit. We probably have about 250 people in our office, especially younger folks, maybe the 0 to 5 entry level folks. There's probably 20 plus people now who are part of the LGBT community, and there's pride flags everywhere. It's great. And I think our company never said we're only going to hire these people. They just had a culture and they had a policy that invited those people into the fold and allowed them to be hired, whether it was job descriptions that weren't super exclusive or other pieces. And now we have a really strong culture of inclusivity because that's just who you have to work with. So now you're surrounded by all of these people and in conversations, and it's becoming just as natural as it should be.
Well, and people looking for work are, they're also making a choice. So they might be interviewing at your firm or your firm. And I've had people tell me, I've took the job here because of that welcoming feeling and those policies and those things that are in place. So I think that is a really valid point.
I had someone says very similarly. We hired a young woman. It's a little bit of a tangent, but I thought it was worth sharing. We hired a young woman into the construction field. That she's actually a carpenter. She decided that it wasn't a good fit for her to go to college, and she wanted to do something different when she wanted to build a career. So we're chatting. I was asking her how did you decide, and how did you pick Mortensen? And she's a young woman who has Asian heritage, and she said, "Have you been to your website?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "Just go to your website. It's full of women. It's full of people of color. It's full of representation." So it was like that solidified to me immediately who I wanted to work with. And I was like, "That's wonderful to hear," because I didn't even know. So that's like another little tidbit that's like really to help foster that environment, right? Like make sure that there is visibility, that people know about it. People might not know about your internal HR policies upon hiring, but if you're like putting out, like you're really conveying the message via other means, that's gonna be really instrumental for you.
Seeing yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what do we do to make sure that people know that they belong?
This is a special thing that we're doing. So seriously, thank you all for offering your voice and your stories and overall experience in terms of just what is a beautiful, beautiful discussion. So we just really appreciate your participation. Thank you for tuning into the Calibre Cast. We hope that you enjoyed today's high caliber conversation with our leading industry experts. We look forward to having you join us for another insightful episode. Remember to subscribe so that you never miss an episode of the Calibre Cast.